Well, if you have a Bible this morning, turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 3, and we're going to go there today and talk about this thought, does big always have to be big? And as you're doing that, let me share something with you.
It's a mama singing songs about the Lord. It's a daddy spending family time the world says he cannot afford. These simple moments change the world. It's a pastor at a tiny little church. 40 years of loving on the broken and the hurt. These simple moments change the world. Dream small, don't buy the lie, you've got to do it all. Just let Jesus use you where you are. One day at a time, live well, loving God and others as yourself. Find little ways where only you can help. With His great love, a tiny rock can make a giant fall. Dream small. It's visiting the widow down the street, or dancing on a Friday with your friend with special needs. These simple moments change the world. Of course, there's nothing wrong with bigger dreams. Just don't miss the minutes on your way to bigger things. No, 'cause these simple moments change the world. So dream small. Don't buy the lie, you've got to do it all. Just let Jesus use you where you are. One day at a time, live well, loving God and others as yourself. Find little ways where only you can help. With His great love, a tiny rock can make a giant fall. So dream small. Keep loving, keep serving, keep listening, keep learning, keep praying, keep hoping, keep seeking, keep searching. Add up the small things and watch them grow bigger. The God who does all things makes oceans from rivers. So dream small. Don't buy the lie, you've got to do it all. Just let Jesus use you where you are. One day at a time, live well, loving God and others as yourself. Find little ways where only you can help. With His great love, a tiny rock can make a giant fall. Yeah, 5 loaves and 2 fish can feed them all. So dream small. Dream small.
As you're in 1 Corinthians 3 today, I want to ask you this question. Does big always have to be big? I remember as a kid in youth group, I was a youth group kid, grew up in this place we called the Bunker. Our church had the church house on one end of the street, and there was a parsonage next to it, and then actually an office building, and then a parsonage, and then a house, and then this underground building we called the Bunker, and that was where our youth group met every week. And we would do crazy things like youth groups do, and Pastor Dustin and Amanda lead our kids to do all kinds of games and ways to connect with kids, and they draw kids in, and we would do this game we would play called Bigger and Better. Maybe you played it as a kid. And the idea was this, the concept was this. We would divide into teams or pairs or groups or however we evenly separate out the teens, and we would each get a quarter. And so we get our quarter and we come over to Mark and Michelle's and we knock on Mark and Michelle's door and we'd say, hey, Mark and Michelle, I have a quarter. Do you have anything bigger and better than this quarter? And so they'd hand us an egg. We'd take our egg and we come over and we knock on the door and we go to Trichelle's house and we say, hey, Trichelle, I got an egg. Would you trade me this egg for anything bigger or better than this egg? And so we'd get, a shoe. And we'd go knock on Tom and Kathy's door and we'd say, Tom and Kathy, I have one shoe. I don't know what you're going to do with it, but do you have anything bigger and better than this shoe? And so the game would go on after a certain amount of time, and this works better in small rural areas because really we're not going to travel from Mark and Michelle's to Trichelle's to Tom and Kathy's because that's quite a bit of territory if you know where they live. That's going to take up most of your time. But anyway, in small communities it works, or neighborhoods, and you go around and you do this. And it's just fun because the goal is always to get something bigger and better. And the fun thing would be you come back to the youth group or come back to the church after a certain amount of time, and everybody would bring their treasures, the biggest and best thing they could come up with. And I remember one time we came back with a toilet, I think it was. I don't know, somebody, and you know what really works is if you catch on to what the teens are doing, this is a great way to get rid of junk in your yard, or in your backyard, or garbage you need to get rid of. So if you have a toilet laying around, then send it on. I can't remember if it was Sonia's youth group or mine that we talked about this. Somebody came back with a car hood. The hood of a car or a truck was donated or given to the teens. And the fun thing is that the Pastor Dustin and Amanda always get to figure out what to do with this junk when the game is over, because you can't just throw it in the garbage can, so. But the idea was that we get something bigger and better. And often in life, we work with a similar mentality. We think or feel pressured that something has to be bigger or better. That song struck me as I was coming back on the airplane from Mexico. And when we went to Mexico, we've gone there now, my family and I have gone 6 years in a row. Connor and Christian have gone. Connor's gone every year with me, Cassie just about every year, and Christian has gone a couple times with us. And you go and you do this big thing and you give somebody a house and you go, wow, 4 days out of 365 I gave to somebody and they got a house, and that's a big deal for them and it transforms their life. And you come back with this kind of mentality, you get back to regular life in the United States, back to your family and your job and everything, and you go, okay, where's the next big thing I've got to do? And we get caught up in that mentality thinking bigger has to be better. And I was on the plane coming back listening to the radio in flight, and that song came on, and I just was struck by that thought. The phrase always has been, dream big. The sky's the limit. Shatter the roof, blow the ceiling off, do whatever you want. Don't stop, no limitations, no restrictions. And certainly we agree that with God that is absolutely the case. But I love the message of the song that just said, hey, dream small. We think or feel pressured, and especially in America, because we want to be bigger and better than everybody and everything, that we have to have more, we need to get more, we need to do more. We're always chasing something bigger and better. We're rarely content, and often we struggle not even with just material things, but we even find ourselves struggling with position in life or who we are. And self-image and self-confidence issues become an issue because we're constantly aiming to be someone else that seems better or bigger than us, or more successful, or prettier, or smarter, or thinner, or richer, or stronger. Now, I'm not saying that striving to better yourself is a bad thing. It's not. We should have goals and hopes, and we don't want to be stagnant in life. We don't want to just coast into heaven, because that's not the way God wants us to be. But better ourselves, not to become better than somebody else. And then we also find ourselves, even in church circles, finding ourselves in this thought or this process that in order to do something for Jesus, it's got to be bigger or better. Bigger or better than the other person that they did, or bigger or better than the other church or the other ministry. And really, jealousy begins to set in even. Well, they got to do that, or they get to do this, or how come I want to be like that? And I often wonder if God just doesn't want to grab us by the shoulders and just say, just sit still. The corny old saying is, bloom where you're planted. Yes, I get it, but really there's some truth to that. And really, church leadership isn't immune to this either. For years, there's been a mentality among church leaders and church evaluators that you're only growing and getting bigger and better if your numbers are growing. We've been, for years, numbers driven. I'm pleased to see that emphasis backing off a little bit. I do think numbers are a good thermometer for us to indicate whether or not we are growing. It's a tangible thing. We can see growth based on numbers. That's okay. But let's not get so wrapped up in thinking that we have to keep gaining numbers in order to be better. Across our Northwest Nazarene district, I would guess, and I don't have accurate statistics about this, but I would guess that probably at least 75 to 80% of the churches on our district, that's 75 plus churches, 75 to 80% of those churches are of church size probably 100 or less. And often, of those 100 or less, probably 50% of them are probably 50 or less. The size of the church doesn't necessarily make it a better church. That is not to take away from large churches that do great things and do wonderful ministries. But also don't miss the ministries of the small, consistent churches in small rural communities that continue to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ day in and day out, and people's lives are changed there as equally and as effectively as they are at the mega church down the street. But we get caught up in this, and our focus shifts from quality of relationship with Jesus Christ to quantity of people in the church seats. We've got to have more lights, fancier sanctuaries, bigger video screens, bigger buildings, flashier illustrations, better decorations, newer everything. Now, there is a time when it's time to update and clean up and fix up and redo some things. That's fine. And by themselves, these things are not wrong. It is effective to have lighting that emphasizes sometimes the mood of the story you're trying to tell. That's fine. Sometimes adding in some new worship songs really drives home a point and can be used by God to touch someone's heart. That's fine. But everything does not always have to be bigger and better. And if the message becomes sidelines because we're always focused on being bigger and better, then we're off key. I really began to think about this as the advertisements for the Franklin Graham revivals came along. Wasn't that long ago, Franklin Graham was down in Tri-Cities and down in Oregon and out in our northwest areas. And of course, he's carrying the mantle of his father, Billy Graham, whose ministry was founded in crusades and stadiums across America. And about that time, Billy Graham had died recently, and so the stories of those crusades were circling around. And then Greg Laurie, who was another well-known evangelist, was preaching in stadiums and literally around the world because of a live video stream you could show on your screen. And those Coliseum-type things, they're not bad. They're much bigger than we can do. They pack in 10 times the amount of people we pack in here, maybe 100 times the amount of people we pack in here on a Sunday morning. That's not a bad thing. Maybe somebody in this room was saved at one of those Billy Graham crusades. Or you attended a Franklin Graham crusade. Or you watched Greg Laurie on TV or on the video and you were stirred by that and God touched you with something he said. That's not bad. But we do have to be careful in thinking, though, that we don't get caught up in thinking or believing that our own evangelism, our own sharing of the gospel of Jesus Christ, our own story, and our own personal and church ministries somehow are less than because they're not bigger or better. I think that's why I like this song that we just opened with. It reminds me and reminds us that the little things we do every single day are so important. They show love. They show care. They show an investment into the life of a person that God has connected us with. And you may be thinking, Pastor Jim, we've heard this story before. You have preached this before. This is the mantra of Bethel Nazarene, that we will go out and connect with people that God has placed in our lives through open doors. And we will love them. And we will touch them in the way that Jesus touched their lives. And we will do what he did and do what he said. And in a short time, we're going to see some examples of what Jesus did and how powerfully he connected with people in little ways. Remember the line in the song that said, "Simple moments change the world. Don't buy the lie that you've got to do it all." Just let Jesus use you where you are, no matter what you're doing. If you and I are willing to be used by Jesus, then it's all for Jesus, no matter what we're doing. It doesn't have to be the preacher standing on the sermon or in front of the church preaching the sermon on Sunday mornings. Your story with somebody is equally as effective as the sermon that I will preach on a Sunday morning. Your testimony about receiving a cart for some crafts because you asked God for it and he answered the smallest of minute, simple little requests in our lives can be used by God to show somebody that yes, he does listen and he does care and he does hear you. Desmond Tutu is the Archbishop of an Anglican church in South Africa, and he said this: "Do your little bit of good where you are. It's those little bits of good put together that overwhelm the world. Collectively overwhelm the world." It's so easy to find ourselves caught up in this mentality that has us thinking that in order to share Jesus, in order to tell people about Jesus Christ, that we have to know the entire theology of the Gospels. We have to know how the books came to be and what order they went in and who wrote which one and how the verses, and got to have the Roman road memorized, all these things, and where did the dinosaurs go and how did they get wives and all these answers. We have to have the big fancy salvation plan in order to introduce somebody to Jesus. Or even that we have to lead somebody to Jesus. And you're thinking, wait a minute, Pastor Jim, did you just tell me that I don't have to lead people to Jesus? Sort of. You see, we sometimes we discount The little moments that Jesus and I, or Jesus and you, share him with someone else that don't lead to a salvation moment. Does that make sense? We get so wrapped up in thinking, okay, I'm going to get him there, I'm going to get him there, I'm going to get him, okay, now we're going to pray. And they're going to accept Jesus. There have been sermons and services that I have been in that I have either preached or sat in where you think, man, this guy has taken it home in this message, and there will be a revival breakout in here, and we will be here till Christmas. And not a single person goes to the altar. Not a single person raises their hand. And we get so caught up in thinking, well, what happened? It wasn't good enough. It wasn't better. It wasn't bigger. It wasn't longer. Well, nobody wants longer, but it wasn't flashier. Is that somehow a missed moment? I don't believe so if God is in that moment. If we're trusting him and we're believing what he's told us and we're believing and sharing the message he's given us, then how can it not be a God moment? Don't miss out that the little moments are so important. You may not be the person that leads someone to Jesus Christ. You may not be the person that prays the prayer. You may be, but you may not be. That doesn't mean that you're not significant. And Paul really clearly paints this for us in 1 Corinthians chapter 3. Paul the apostle, the guy who wrote most of the New Testament. If you want to label top 10 guys in the New Testament, Paul's going to be at the top of the list. Well, maybe second behind Jesus. But other than that, he's going to be one of the top 5. He preached all over. He planted churches all over. He went on 3 different missionary trips. And these weren't just, I'm going to go for a week and come home. Huge ministry this guy had. And he was even willing to say and remind the church at Corinth these words, 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 6 through 9. He said, I planted the seed. Apollos watered it, but God has been making it grow. So neither the one who plants nor the one who waters is anything, but only God who makes things grow. The one who plants and the one who waters have one purpose, and they each will be rewarded according to their own labor. For we are co-workers in God's service. You are God's field, God's building. When Paul writes that and he says, I planted the seed, he's saying, I told the story. I showed the testimony. I gave the illustration. I quoted the verse. I prayed with the person. And we've all done that. And then Doran comes along, or Mike comes along, or Teresa comes along, and they pray with that person, and they love them, and they support them, and they encourage them, and they give to them. And they pick them up and give them a ride to church, or they take them home from work, or they do whatever God places in our life, the small, simple, mundane, routine things to show and validate who he is and the love that we claim to have. And they do that, and they don't pray with them. And then Pastor Dustin comes along, and they have their teen in youth group one night. And he and Amanda get to lead that teen to Jesus Christ. That validates the love that we're showing to a family. They still haven't prayed. They still haven't accepted Jesus. But it shows them we're going to continue to love. Sometimes you'll be the waterer. Sometimes you'll be the fertilizer. And God will always make it grow if we are diligent and obedient to follow the steps that he places before us. Why does big always have to be big? Why? Why do we think that we have to do something huge and enormous and flashy? Now, there are moments when that happens. There are moments when that's necessary. There are moments when we can do that. And even in our church, for us, we do some big things. We have big events that we hope make a big impact for the gospel of Jesus and his ministry and his kingdom. We do those things, and those are fine, and we do them well, and we pray God uses them. But we don't do them every day. Does that mean somehow that every day we're not being used by God? No. Our instructions were to go into all the world and preach the gospel, to introduce people to Jesus Christ, to say, hey, let me tell you about this man in my life and what he did for me. That's our instructions. But I don't see anywhere that it says in scriptures that I have to convince someone to make that decision that they would follow him too. All of the times when the gospel writers and the disciples, they introduced people to Jesus, I don't see anywhere where we are responsible for their decision. We're responsible to lead them so they would have an opportunity to make a decision, But it's their introduction to Jesus Christ and the Spirit of God talking to their heart time after time after time after time and showing them how much we love them time after time after time after time that leads them to a relationship with Jesus Christ. Don't get caught up in thinking that somehow you're failing if you don't have the big salvation moments. Instead, we're called to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ, to tell people what he said, to tell them what he did, and how it impacted our lives. And then we show the truth and the validity of that by the way we walk out our lives with the things that we do. Peter talks about this in 1 Peter chapter 4. I'm going to read it to you in the Message Bible. I can't fit it all on the screen for you, so you can either trust me or turn there yourself. 1 Peter chapter 4, beginning in verse 7. And Peter's trying to build up some, what's the word I'm thinking of? That's not the word I'm thinking of, and I'm drawing a blank, but we'll move on without it. Thank you, Patty, for trying. He's trying to build up some motivation. He's trying to say, hey, come on, the time is short. So he says this, everything in the world is about to be wrapped up. So take nothing for granted. Stay wide awake in prayer. Most of all, love each other as if your life depended on it. Love makes up for practically anything. Be quick to give a meal to the hungry, a bed to the homeless, cheerfully. Be generous with the different things God gave you, passing them around so all get in on it. If words, let it be God's words. If help, let it be God's hearty help. That way, God's bright presence will be evident in everything through Jesus, and he'll get all the credit as the one mighty in everything, on course to the end of time, oh yes. In other words, what Peter is saying, he's saying, do these things. Give somebody a meal, open your home, offer a bed, pick somebody up and give them a ride. Do these things, hand them a cup of cold water we'll talk about in a few moments. Do these things in a way that so that people will see the validity and the proof and the emphasis, and they will solidify Jesus' message. I like how he made sure to emphasize that we should do these things cheerfully. Sometimes we do them begrudgingly or grouchy. All right, if I have to, I'll go down there and serve burgers at the mission. I don't want to. Then don't. Go away. Really? Right? Do these things cheerfully. Show up and put a smile on your face. Let your body and your emotions and there are times when your heart is torn apart and no, you don't want to go. But God says go, and so we go, whether it's the mission or it's Rod's house or it's hanging out with the teens on a Friday night or a Wednesday night or it's serving in children's ministry or it's serving in the nursery or it's coming to church on a Sunday, whatever it is. There are times when your heart is just broken over things in life that are going on, but yet you still serve the way God asks you to serve and to show that, yes, I will still continue to go on and God gives me strength to do that, and I'm going to continue to serve. I'm going to continue to love. And I'm going to continue to give. And I'm going to continue to show people that the love that Jesus talks about, that I tell them about, has validity to it. There's evidence about it. Right at the end of the verse, he says, do all these things, and Peter says, notice that way, God shines. People see him. They go, oh, okay. All right, Monica, you've been telling me about Jesus Christ. All right, Kathy Dean, you've been telling me about Jesus and how much he means to you and how much he loves the world. Now I see it. Tangibly lived out, I see it. In church circles, there's a lot of discussion about how we should be reaching the millennials. You know what wants to reach, how the millennials want to be reached? They want to say, put your money where your mouth is. Show me. Let's take what you believe and what you're saying and let's do something with it. You can sit in your church and do that all day long. Talk about it all you want till Christmas. Let's do something with it. That's how we catch people with, or how we reach people with the message of Jesus Christ. They say, okay, what you say is what you believe, or what you believe is what you say, and let's do something with it. And then God gets the credits. We don't need to do anything for our own credits. We should do everything we do without saying anything about everything we do. Catch that? We should do everything we do without saying anything about everything we do. In other words, if I have to tell somebody, wow, I read 6 chapters of James today. I read 42 verses in Psalms today. I spent all day at the mission. I did all the... If we have to tell everybody, then as John Chris says, check your heart. Really, what is our motivation? Why are we doing the things that we're doing? If we need to tell others what we're doing so they'll notice what we're doing, then we need to check our motivation about what we're doing. I love the stories that come out every Christmas season when you go into a store and there's always somebody out there ringing the bell with the Salvation Army kettle, right? And usually every year there's a story that comes out of somebody who walked by and dropped in a check. 10 grand. Dropped in a diamond ring worth 5 grand. Just dropped it in and kept on walking. Nobody stops and says, hey, ring the bell louder. I've got a $10,000 diamond ring. Tink, I dropped it in. Nobody does that. There's always stories about somebody who walks by, drops it in, and keeps on going. Anonymously. Nobody knows where that came from. Just given because God said give and they gave. Simply but profoundly, the smallest of gestures and things are big. Christian author Richard Foster, in his book Celebration of Discipline, wrote this. He writes, self-righteous service comes through human effort. True service comes from a relationship with the divine other deep inside. Self-righteous service is impressed with the big deal. True service finds it's almost impossible to distinguish the small from the large service. Self-righteous service requires external rewards. True service rests contented in hiddenness. Self-righteous service is highly concerned about results. True service is free of the need to calculate results. Self-righteous service picks and chooses whom we serve. True service is indiscriminate in its ministry. Self-righteous service is affected by moods and whims. True service ministers simply and faithfully because there's a need. Self-righteous service is temporary. True service is a lifestyle. Self-righteous service is without sensitivity. It insists on meeting the need even when to do so would be destructive. True service can withhold the service as freely as perform it. And self-righteous service fractures community. True service, on the other hand, builds community. Why are we doing what we're doing? Everything we do, we should be doing it without saying anything about everything we do. And whatever it is you're doing, don't discount it. I love these examples. Jesus called the widow's 2 coins a much bigger gift than the rich. The woman who was gathering sticks to make a fire for a final meal for her son before they starved to death cooked 1 meal for Elijah, and God provided for her forever. Jesus used 5 loaves and 2 fishes to feed people, thousands of them. Little boy's lunch. Jesus talked to the woman caught in adultery. And when you read that story, notice that he didn't give her anything, tangible, literal, didn't hand her anything, didn't touch her, didn't heal her, didn't deliver her. He simply talked to her. Now, you could add to that, yes, he delivered her from captivity, he healed her from her sin, all that. I get that, but I'm talking about literally. He talked to her. He said, you are valuable to me. The woman at the well, John 4, the Samaritan woman, he didn't heal her. He didn't give her anything. In fact, he asked from her. He didn't give her anything. He talked to her. He just talked to her and showed her value. The simplest of things can make such a profound impact in someone's life. You see, people want validity and honesty and genuineness. They want a real walk with Jesus Christ, and they want to see it lived out in you and me, and they can see it in the simplest of ways. I don't have to quote them all of the Psalms. I don't have to memorize every book of the Bible. Now, please don't misunderstand me and go home and say, Pastor Jim said I don't have to read my Bible. That is not what I said. There is absolutely validity and need for us to understand God as we study his word and what he said to us in his scriptures. Don't misunderstand me. But do you get the point I'm making? We think we've got to know all the answers and have all the big flashy things to do in order to make an impact in someone's life, and that's not true. They want to see from us, are we walking out the talk we're talking about? When people see that in our lives, when they see our lives match what we say we know, then they're interested in what we know. This week at the Uni Gospel Mission Evening of Hope, Rick Phillips said this: people really are more affected by how much you care more than how much you know. And throughout Scripture, we're told to show the message of Jesus way more than we're ever told to talk about it. Matthew 10, 40 through 42. Anyone who welcomes you welcomes me, and anyone who welcomes me welcomes the one who sent me. Whoever welcomes a prophet as a prophet will receive a prophet's reward, and whoever welcomes a righteous person as a righteous person will receive a righteous person's reward. If anyone gives even a cup of cold water to one of these little ones who is my disciple, truly I tell you that person will certainly not lose their reward. So again, I ask, why does big have to be big? He didn't say anybody who drills a well and provides all the water for the entire community will be deemed righteous. He said anybody who just gives a cup of cold water. Why does big have to be big? The Message Bible writes the last part of that verse this way. This is a large work I've called you to, but don't be overwhelmed by it. It's best to start small. Giving a cool cup of water to someone who is thirsty, for instance. The smallest act of giving or receiving makes you a true apprentice. You won't lose out on a thing. Why does big have to be big? My study Bible writes these notes for verse 42. How much we love God can be measured by how well we treat others. Jesus' example of giving a cup of cold water to a thirsty child is a good model of unselfish service. A child usually can't or won't return the favor. God notices every good deed we do or don't do as if he were the one receiving it. Is there something unselfish you can do for someone else today? Although no one else may see you, God will notice. So let me wrap up today's sermon with this question. What are we doing? What simple little thing could we do to make an impact in the life of somebody around us? I'll tout his horn for him. Last year, or a year or so ago, I remember Kathy talking about a time when it was a hot summer day, and she commented on Tom was going home one day and saw this little old lady trying to mow her lawn. Stopped and helped her mow the lawn. Took him, half an hour, maybe not even that. Stopped and helped her mow the lawn. Last month, Pastor Justin preached about joyful service. And so after the service was over, I think the kids might have been upstairs during that sermon. In fact, I know they were. The service was over. Everybody went about their own ways. Tamara was at the grocery store. And the kids were excited to help a lady with their groceries. Simply just help a lady with her groceries. Brighten her day. Did you preach the Roman road? Did you give talk about all four gospels? Did you tell people how Adam and Eve had wives, or Adam's kids had wives, and did you answer where the dinosaurs? No, you didn't do any of that. You just simply helped somebody with their groceries and said, let me show you the love that Jesus has given me for you. Show it to you tangibly. He also briefly told you the story of a firefighter who got some shoes for a lady. I want to show you that story. Really makes an impact about the message we're talking about today. The simplest of things can make such a big difference in the life of somebody in crisis or in need or just an opportunity that God has connected you with in everyday life that he wants you to minister to.
Back in New York, I am the head of development for a nonprofit called Robin Hood. When I'm not fighting poverty, I'm fighting fires as the assistant captain of a volunteer fire company. Now, in our town, where the volunteers supplement a highly skilled career staff, you have to get to the fire scene pretty early to get in on any action. I remember my first fire. I was the second volunteer on the scene, so there was a pretty good chance I was going to get in. But still, it was a real foot race against the other volunteers to get to the captain in charge to find out what our assignments would be. When I found the captain, he was having a very engaging conversation with the homeowner, who was surely having one of the worst days of her life. Here it was, the middle of the night. She was standing outside in the pouring rain, under an umbrella, in her pajamas, barefoot, while her house was in flames. The other volunteer who had arrived just before me, let's call him Lex Luthor, got to the captain first and was asked to go inside and save the homeowner's dog. The dog! Oh, I was stunned with jealousy. Here was some lawyer or money manager who for the rest of his life gets to tell people that he went into a burning building to save a living creature. Just because he beat me by 5 seconds. Well, I was next. The captain waved me over. Said, Bezos, I need you to go into the house. I need you to go upstairs, past the fire, and I need you to get this woman a pair of shoes. I swear. So, not exactly what I was hoping for, but off I went. Up the stairs, down the hall, past the real firefighters who were pretty much done putting out the fire at this point, into the master bedroom to get a pair of shoes. Now, I know what you're thinking, but I'm no hero. I carried my payload back downstairs where I met my nemesis and the precious dog by the front door. We took our treasures outside to the homeowner where, not surprisingly, his received much more attention than did mine. A few weeks later, the department received a letter from the homeowner thanking us for the valiant effort displayed in saving her home. The act of kindness she noted above all others, someone had even gotten her a pair of shoes. You know, in both my vocation at Robin Hood and my avocation as a volunteer firefighter, I am witness to acts of generosity and kindness on a monumental scale. But I'm also witness to acts of grace and courage on an individual basis. And you know what I've learned? They all matter. So as I look around this room at people who either have achieved or are on their way to achieving remarkable levels of success, I would offer this reminder. Don't wait. Don't wait until you make your first million to make a difference in somebody's life. If you have something to give it now. Serve food at a soup kitchen, clean up a neighborhood park, be a mentor. Not every day is going to offer us a chance to save somebody's life, but every day offers us an opportunity to affect one. So get in the game. Save the shoes. Thank you.
I've never gotten shoes, or the dog, but maybe someday. The point is to ask ourselves the question, what can we do? We've seen examples of God saying to us, just serve somebody a cup of cold water. Last year, we went over to Hoover Elementary when they had the service for their counselor who died. That's all we did. Simply handed somebody a cup of coffee. But what made the impact, I think, and I hope and I pray, was not because we were so giving and so wonderful and so loving and so special, but we were willing to say, we will set aside what we ritualistically do on a Sunday morning and cancel service and serve you and not ask for anything from you and not ask to be put in the Yakima Herald about it, not ask to toot our own horn, just to do it because God asked us to step into an opportunity where we could tangibly show love to some people with a cup of coffee, to show them how they could park their cars on a busy, chaotic Sunday morning. And we will do it again and again and again, because the impact we can make in the smallest of ways is so much more important than what we do in here on a Sunday morning. Now, this is not wrong, and don't go home and say, well, Pastor Jim said we didn't have to come to church. That's not what I said. But I'm saying we get so caught up in the ritualistic things we do because they are Christian things to do, and we got to check off our checklist of Christian things to do so we make sure we make it to heaven and get a good report card, that we miss the impactful, huge little things that we can do for someone's life. Jesus talked about this when he was accused of healing on the Sabbath. Oh, you terrible Jesus, you healed on the Sabbath. You know what his comeback was? You hypocrites. Did you not go out and feed your animals today? You worked on the Sabbath too. And I don't ever want to go before Jesus and hear him say, here was a chance to go hand somebody a cup of coffee in my name, and you skipped and went to church. Don't hear that from your pastor very often, do you? Do something as simple as having someone over for a cup of coffee. It's not a major achievement towards the goal of world evangelism and sharing everybody with the gospel with every person that needs to know it. But it is a major act of obedience and love and hospitality. Let me leave with this question. What can you do? What can I do? Today, in the next few hours, on my way home tonight, as I come to the office tomorrow, big doesn't always have to be big. And when it isn't, it still is. Let's pray. God, I thank you that you always want to use us wherever you take us. I pray that we are not oblivious to those moments that can be so huge in someone's life despite how small they might be in ours. Lord, would you convict us, challenge us, show us, encourage us, lead us, guide us, motivate us, kick us in the pants if we need it, God, to say, hey, do this in my name, and it will make a big difference in the life of somebody who needs to know about Jesus. Thank you that you always want to use us. Thank you that you always keep using us. I pray that we do that honorably and honestly, that we don't do it for any credit of our own. We just do it because you said do it. And you'll be blessed, and you will use it to lead someone even closer, ever closer, to a relationship with Jesus Christ. Thanks, God, for the little moments that brought us here today, the little moments that introduced us to Jesus Christ. Thank you for the little moments that led us here to this place with this church family that make a big impact in our lives and our relationship with Jesus Christ. In Jesus' name, amen.